This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Paramang people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
We can make a wonderful style of Shiraz in the Barossa that you can't really make anywhere else in the world. But you know what? On the side, I was having an affair with Grenache and it was awesome.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale.
Alex Head fell in love with wine whilst travelling, and he's worked numerous roles in the industry ever since. It is his label Head Wines that has become synonymous with the Barossa, where he crafts age-worthy and site-specific wines. Alex Head, thanks for joining me.
Hey Shanteh, great to hear your voice. A pleasure to be here.
It's been too long since I've seen you. How the hell are you?
Very well. Yeah, I'm in sunny Sydney. The sun's finally come out, and just working today on wine sales and getting ready for some bottling in 2 weeks. And yeah, got to go and pick up the boys and take them to soccer practice after this. So yeah, life's pretty good.
You're certainly somebody that keeps very busy. For everybody that doesn't know Head Wines, and shame on you if you don't, Alex works and lives out of Sydney, but then crafts his wine in the Barossa. So take us back to where you got your start in wine, because it's a kind of interesting tale.
Yeah, so we got to go back more than half my life, I guess. My first real taste of wine was in a wine club that I belonged to at college at Sydney Uni, and I started drinking a lot and dining a lot at that stage, and I quickly sort of disappeared off overseas after that, and decided when I was on the steps of the Sacré-Cœur that wine was going to be my thing. And when I got back to Sydney, I started working with some wine retailers. And that was probably a 5 or 6 year stint with people like John Osbeiston at Ultimo Wine Centre. And that was a time of intense learning. And then moved on to work for Langton's. And around that time, I think I decided that I wanted to go and learn how to make wine. But just needed to be in the right frame of mind and be able to disappear off to the Barossa, which is a bit of a sort of a mistress or a love of mine, I guess. Yeah, and getting to the Barossa was just wonderful. It was those first few years in the Barossa were really pretty carefree, and travelling around Australia and making wine in different wineries that I held in high regard. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, pretty intense sort of focus on just one thing in my life. I think I lived and breathed wine 7 days a week at that time. And if I look at myself now, I barely get a chance to, because I've got a young family and a wife that supports me, which is great, but there are so many other things happening that wine seems to almost get in the way at the moment. But it was a really good time. I mean, that's sort of 15 to 20 years ago now, and I was perhaps a different man back then. But yeah.
Wine is incredibly immersive, and it is a little bit, I often refer to it as a bit like the rabbit hole, because once you start asking a few questions or your interest is piqued, it only continues on from there. But you travelled a little bit, and I want to hear a little bit about the Northern Rhone and your experience there, but because I know that's special to you, but then also I want to hear about how do you get your start in somewhere like the Barossa when you've got all these family legacies, people that have owned wine for a long time, when you don't live there? So tell me a bit about Northern Rhone, and then tell me a little bit of how you transitioned into getting your start in the Barossa.
So my experience initially with the Rhone was a little bit of travel when I was in my early 20s, just after university. I had no idea about Rhone wine at that stage. But in visiting, it was, I was on a bus and trains cruising around Europe. And I just, at that stage, I knew I was just interested. It was just the pursuit of pleasure. So it was food and wine. And when I got back to Sydney, Rhone for me was really just the wine that I could afford. Bordeaux was impossible. They sold it in a strange way. Burgundy was becoming too expensive. And Rhone just sort of sat with me very well, the accessibility of it and the non-snobbishness of it, I guess. But it wouldn't be till another couple of years later I'd start to go to the Rhone Valley with importers. And one was James Johnson from World Wine Estates. And it was at that stage where obviously when I was retailing, I was learning a lot about wines from winemakers that would come to visit me. But going there and talking to the winemakers and being in their vineyards was really, in many ways, I remember recently being there with Tim Smith, and Tim Smith and myself looked at each other and went, oh, these guys do things the opposite way to what, we do in the Barossa. So it's really important for me to go to the Rhone Valley and learn what they do, because a lot of my brand is a bit of a nod to the Rhone and the past and sort of tradition, I guess. But then translating that into the Barossa and what I do is where things get really muddled, I guess. So when I decided that I wanted to go to the Barossa in 2006 to make wine, one of the reasons was I could see the quality of the fruit was very high, and I could see that there was a lot of old vineyards. And Barossa has this sort of wealth of access to old vineyards, and I just knew that if I were going anywhere else to try to create this Rhone brand that I had an idea about, it was going to be much harder for me. What I didn't know was that in the Barossa, we have two businesses working in congruency with each other. And one is the growers and one is the producers. So what I didn't know at the time in 2006 was that I had to start building a really good network there of growers. And a little bit like if you imagine the Barossa is like a patchwork of kind of like a monopoly board. And you just have to go around it as many times as you can and hopefully land on the right squares and have the opportunity to work with those vineyards and those growers. So, a lot of the growers are fourth, fifth generation. So no one's going to give up a great old vineyard if they're working with it. So it's just a matter of being there, working slowly, which helps. The opportunities for new vineyard don't come along very often. But what that does is it helps you to work slowly and methodically in building the idea of how you want to present a set of wines to communicate and talk about the Barossa and its terroir, and what the winemaker believes is the most important message, and ultimately how to get more pleasure to the customer, I guess. Yeah, so I didn't really realise how important the Rhone was to me, but every time I go back there, well, hopefully a few more times in the next few years. I'm always just looking to see, still drinking, the wines that I love and the wines that inspire me, and then just going to really understand them by citing them and talking to those wine growers. And hopefully just gaining those little 1%ers and adding them all up and trying to improve what I can offer my customers here.
Now, I mean, not only do they work with, Syrah or Shiraz, as you work with in the Barossa in the Rhone, you also kind of modelled your business off a kind of negociant style. That would make a lot of sense to people in France, but what does that mean for Australians if they're kind of trying to understand your business? What does that negociant style mean?
Yeah, there's no English translation for negociant, but I was heavily inspired by some of the negociant houses in France, and there are some really successful ones in the Rhone. One of them being Guigal, and I liked the way it seemed as though you could start a business like that without owning large swathes of land and farming them yourself. And the idea was to originally create the business that way, and there are many advantages to running a business that way. You can bring value to your customer. You can negate vintage variation in many ways. You can blend across, by blending across sites, and you can really, I suppose, highlight some great sites within where you work. So, I needed a way to get the business going, and initially I started bartering with some producers and wineries in the Barossa. So I had access to the market. I had some marketing skills, some sales skills, some contacts on the Eastern Seaboard. So I would help a few small brands setting them up to sell their product, getting them in contact with distributors, and in a way they allowed me to make small parcels of wine in their premises. And that's how I got started, because when you're 27 years old, there's not a lot of capital behind you, and I had no money, and I knew what I wanted to do, and I kind of gave myself 5, maybe 6 years to get things going. So that's how it started, and then I just didn't really understand that was going to be the most important thing as the business grew, and over time that negociant style of business just seemed to be the best thing. And growing grapes, although now I've got a lot of experience in vineyards and I can walk into a vineyard and know exactly what product is going to come out of it, I'm probably not the greatest gardener. If you come to my garden in Sydney, you'll see that everything's wilted and half cooked and dried and dead. So what's really important there is knowing what you're good at and really focusing on that. And I figured out that I was good at communicating with these growers. Growers are not good at communicating, by the way. And I was able to translate a story to my customers through these growers and blend together. I knew I was good at blending, and I knew that I was good at finding balance in wines. And I knew that I could offer my customers something very different, unique, but in time would be sought after. Because when I started making wine in the Barossa, there was a small number of people interested in, relatively earlier picked styles of the time. and, wines with a bit more whole bunch, lower alcohol. I had a small group of followers, and just grew that very slowly as I grew in access to great vineyards. It's taken me 12 years to get access to what I would call very old, established Shiraz vines within the Barossa. And that, like, it's been a long process, and it's costly. But the dream of making grand vin Shiraz in the Barossa is getting closer.
It's a big dream, but it's a great dream.
Yeah, I've got nothing else to do.
Yeah, right.
Someone asked me the other day, what would you do if you weren't making wine? Honestly, my head nearly exploded. I had no idea. Coffee? I don't know. Shivers.
I think that, we don't often talk about, like you said, how people do get started, and you're an incredibly patient person and also willing to do the hard yards, which is, at the core of a negotiant or somebody that has great relationships. And I think that that's a real testament to you, because you were willing to spend the time to ask the right people the questions and to, stick around and develop these relationships so that you can then work with these growers. And like I said, we don't always talk about the fact that, a lot of wineries bring in more juice than what they can make into their label. And it's not always because they don't want that particular plot or they don't want that particular bin of grapes. It might just have to do with that it doesn't suit their portfolio, and so they on-sell wines. But it's always about having a good relationship, because if they don't like you, they're not going to give it to you.
You're in trouble. Yeah, you're in big trouble. Yeah, I've certainly learnt the hard way a few times. I've ruined a few relationships. Trying to get growers to do what you need them to do, there's really only one thing that's going to help, and that's money. So, there's a real balance there. And some of my growers drink wine and some of them don't. And, I have to invest in them, and I have to, not in their vineyards, I have to invest in them personally. And I have to understand what makes them tick. And I have to, it's kind of like family members. They are family members. And, at the moment there's 25 of them. And I also need that many people around me. I also need to have a community around me. I've realized that over time. And that could be because I work alone in an office, and I don't employ anyone really. So, I just love having all these other people in my life. And I've got one grower that I think I talk to every second day, which is a bit weird. So, yeah, very lucky. But I mean, I was just thinking about what you said before, and that, this long, slow process, I think, which is weird for me, because as a young man, I was in such a hurry. I don't know if you know that, but I had an illness which sort of made me think pretty hard about what I was doing with my life pretty early on. And the weird thing to plug into the side of that is I really had no interest in money at all when I was younger. And I think I got that through my father, he's a priest and an academic. And thank God Mum had an eye for detail and was interested in finer things, because I think that's helped me a bit with wine. But yeah, I really discovered in the first 10 years of making wine that you couldn't even be interested in money. It's certainly not a business model where you're going to be burning $100 bills to keep you warm. It's just you got to love wine. You got to be mad crazy about just pleasure and increasing pleasure, and every vintage trying to produce the best wine possible. Because it is a long, slow journey. So you get one shot a year, to make wine, and most people do their job every day, but there's really only a 6 to 8 week period where I get a chance to do that very thing.
I pulled out a quote that I found snooping into your life, and that was that one time you said, "The thirst for wine knowledge is a journey, one that I travel because it can never end." And I love that sentiment. I think it says so much about you, because it really kind of captures this unobtainable pursuit of passion, the mystique of wine, where it's not something to hold and obtain. It's kind of got to be that you're willing to go on the journey and never kind of reach a destination, and that's the beauty of it. And I wish I had that quote when I worked with a group of sommeliers, because I think when you're frustrated and you're trying to learn more about wine and you just realize it's never going to end, you're never going to know it all, I actually think that's letting go is the beauty of that. So I think you put that so beautifully.
Yeah, perhaps there was a little more in my past just to do with thinking about death as a young man, and my family being quite religious, thinking about the afterlife, and I remember when I was about 29 really thinking that my afterlife was going to be the wine that I made and that it lived on in bottle. And I thought, well, if I can make a 50-year wine, maybe some people down the lineage will say, "Oh, I remember that. Remember Alex Head? Oh, he made these wines." Some people are happy with, "Oh, I saw some bloke buying my wine in a bottle shop, and that made me feel special." That's wonderful, but I'd really like to think that I'm not just going to disappear into dust and dirt, and that I actually left something important behind. Now, my two boys, Xavier and Thomas, they're 5 and 7. I at least want to also give them the opportunity to take over Head Wines. Now, it's a long way away, but yeah, I guess a lot of it's to do with the journey never ending. Like how can I keep it going? I guess. Yeah,
it's about just trying to make sense of, isn't it, what we're on this planet for, and what do we do with our time? And I think it's great to be always thinking about what we leave behind, whether it be in someone's memory or, like you said, in something tangible where, who knows, later down the track, you might have a group of, sommeliers or Len Evans scholars opening your wine and drinking it and marveling over how you made that happen. And I think that that's such a lovely way to be remembered. I want to talk a little bit about your brand, because you are a deep thinker and you think a lot about what you do on all levels. What I've noticed over the time I've worked with your wines is your communication in how you tell a story, and you've always used wine names like the Blonde, the Contrarian, the Brumette, almost as characters to help communicate the story of kind of what's in the bottle. Where does that come from? Because if anybody says to a sommelier a little bit about Côte Rôtie and the Côte Blonde, we get it straight away. But to everybody else, how have you made that linkage between the two?
Yeah, well, you've got to be able to communicate a story. And what I realised early on through my retailing days was to get people interested in your wine and your product. They're not really. They do other things. They're not as passionate as you about wine, but they want to support you and they want to be able to relate to that story. So, early on I looked at, I also believe passionately in appellation systems. And it irks me that Australia still sells brand. Like, it kills me every day. Anyway, so what I really wanted to do was get something that was really tangible and grabbable by consumers. I needed a way for them to be able to relate to the wine, but not because of how it tasted initially or what it smelt like, or, there's a lot of wine out there, but I needed people to say, well, I am a blonde, or I am a brunette, or I am a contrarian. Why don't I give that a go? When you're looking on a wine list, there's so many wines and so many names, and I just needed, numbers and colours. Numbers are taken. Colours was a bit difficult, but hair colours seemed to be the next, one of the things that I could get people to grab onto. And contrarian was just, blonde and brunette was obviously to do with Cote Roti. I just loved that story. I fell in love with that story so long ago, 20 years ago. And, in fact, that's one of the things that I first did when I got to the Barossa, which was look for vineyards that could give me the characteristics of the blonde and the brunette. So, but yeah, and contrarian, well, that was just I wanted to do something for myself so that down the track, when I'd realised that I was never going to make Cote Roti in the Barossa, and I was making what was seen as much more traditional Barossan wine, the contrarian would always stay as a little bit of my quirkiness and what I wanted to do in the Barossa, which was just show that winemaking is a choice, that the decisions we make, like, there's 1,000 decisions a winemaker makes, and if you really want to, you can make wine taste almost any way you want. You don't have to be a traditionalist. You don't have to make wine that, a certain way. You can do whatever you want. And the contrarian just is, keeps me inspired and keeps me interested in change and the climate, and keeps me dialed in on vineyard sites and clones and pruning, and really pushing boundaries about what we can achieve with our wines in the Barossa. So yeah, naming is important because just going back to that point, people just aren't as interested as we think they are, as an industry person, and we have to bring them in easy, in a comfortable way, and those characters and words and names just really help them. I used to even, put the sites on the labels, but it's just too much for consumers. Like, I used to put Stonewell and Mopper and Marananga and McCulter and Krondorf and all these, single parishes or on the labels. But in the end, it wasn't that important to them. But I tell you what, blonde, brunette, contrarian, that is important to people.
I think it really is. And I think what's been amazing over the time that I've known you is how adaptable you are to evolving your brand and just making those decisions of, I used to do this, but now I'm going to do this because I'm listening to what the people want. I know I've got a great following, and I think that we can let that go. And I think that must be really quite difficult, because when you do have a good following like you do, you don't want to marginalize anyone or miss out on those opportunities if you are being successful. But you've always listened, and I think that maybe your history with working at Langton's and working importing and doing all the things that you've done have added your understanding of
the consumer.
The consumer, exactly. So But tell me a little bit about, because you do work in the Barossa GI, you've worked in the Barossa Valley. I think now you're predominantly Eden Valley, or I think you are, aren't you? Tell me how you explain the differences between those few sites, or how would you wrap someone's head around the Barossa Valley, Eden Valley, High Eden? How'd you do that?
Yeah, well, obviously the Barossa consists of Eden Valley and Barossa Valley, and within Eden Valley there's also High Eden. And you probably have to look at the rainfall starts in High Eden, runs north along Eden Valley, and then splits into the Barossa Valley at Light Pass, and then snakes south in the Barossa Valley and then out to the ocean. So that's the first really important structure to understand, where the water moves. Now the next really important thing is the Stockwell Fault runs through the middle of the Barossa Valley and the Eden Valley, running north-south. And that, if you follow that further north, it goes to Clare Valley. And if you go south, it goes through Adelaide Hills and then through McLaren Vale and then down to Kangaroo Island. Now, without that fault, I wouldn't be talking to you today. So that's what creates a lot of the unique aspects, soil profiles, rock, water movements. And another interesting thing to note is Barossa Valley is a drowned river valley, and it has a deep aquifer which runs from north to south. And a lot of old vineyards were planted and survived along this North Para River. And you'll find a lot of those old vineyards close to where the river is. And a lot of the older vineyards are also in sandier soils, but that's another story. So if you look at the two major areas, Eden Valley and Barossa Valley, there's another big distinction. Eden Valley, the rock comes from under the earth, so it's granite, essentially. A lot of decomposed granite, and gives a very particular style of Shiraz. And it's at altitude as well, so it's probably a couple of degrees cooler. But when you move down into the Barossa Valley, it's all ocean-derived rock, so limestone and ironstone. And ironstone is actually a form of limestone, but it's got iron in it. Now, you've got a lot of clays, sand, limestone in the Barossa Valley, and what that does, it gives wines that are have a lot more, extraction. You get a lot more skin tannin. You tend to get this sort of sweeter profile of fruit, and that clay that's in the Barossa Valley just doesn't give up the water to the vine as much. So you get these really intense, high alcohol, big extract, very ripe styles of wine that consumers absolutely adore and winemakers adore too. But then when you're in the Eden Valley, that granite just works in a completely different manner with the wine. So the wines tend to be much more linear. They don't have that flesh on them. They have this really discernible square tannin profile. And, you'll note that the Rhone Valley is pretty much granite. So, wines of the Rhone Valley, Shiraz in particular, has a real affinity with the Shiraz from Eden Valley. And that's probably why over the last 10 years, naturally, my vineyard sources have moved towards the Eden Valley because, that's what I was originally interested in. But in saying that, we have 10 Grenache and Mataro vineyards in the Barossa Valley, and quite a few other small Shiraz vineyards that we source from. So it's not just cut and dry. It's infinitely more complex. But that's a really good way to describe the Barossa and the two really interesting, unique parts within it. Starting with the way the water moves, and then the fact that Eden Valley is granitic, and the Barossa Valley is sort of ocean-derived limestone and ironstone.
I knew you were going to be able to say that in so much of a poetic and clear way, and it's exactly why I asked you the question, because I thought if anyone takes something away from this, they will definitely be able to have a grasp or a foothold onto the two regions. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to talk to you a little bit. I could talk to you all day, so I had to limit it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Grenache, because you have championed Grenache for years and years now. And finally, we are starting to see it pay off where people can't get enough. But tell me a little bit about your love affair for Grenache.
Yeah, well, we can go back to 2006. I met a young man called Marco Cirillo, and he owned a vineyard that was planted in around 1850 in the Barossa on sand. And I saw some similarities with that vineyard and another famous winery in Châteauneuf-du-Pape called Rias. And I just loved these old Grenache vineyards we had in the Barossa. And in many late night conversations in the winery with Marco, we would talk about why Grenache was not the Barossa's premier variety. And I got to tell you, I've tried a lot. I've tried so many vineyards and varieties in the Barossa, and Grenache just goes so well. It's such a powerhouse of a variety, and it just eats up the new climate that we have, warmer climate, I would say. And as the years went by after 2009, I always loved drinking Grenache. I always loved the Grenache vineyards in the Barossa. And even though I started my business and based it around Shiraz, Grenache was something that I could just sit alongside until I could convince people that they were missing out on something. All of the big companies had spent so much time, energy, money marketing Shiraz because it's easy to grow, it's cheap to grow. We can make a wonderful style of Shiraz in the Barossa that you can't really make anywhere else in the world. But you know what? On the side, I was having an affair with Grenache, and it was awesome. So I started labeling it pretty simply, Old Vine Grenache, started working with some of Marco's fruit, then started to source some other older Grenache vineyards, and I could get access to them, and I just couldn't believe it. I wasn't paying a lot of money, and I could get access to sort of 60, 70, 80-year-old vine material. Of course, you can't do it these days, but it's all sewn up. But back then, I was working with the Alkena vineyard, or it's now owned by Alkena. A lot of my old vine Grenaches came from that site in Greenock. Still working with one in Krondorf that I've been working with for 10 years now. Some 100-year-old stuff just up the road, which is now owned by Brett Grokey from Barossa. And Stone Garden, I was invited to work with Stone Garden in 2013. We've been making $100 Ancestor Vine Grenache for 10 years now. Grenache we probably, if you start to look at scores, if you start to look deeply into scores from wine writers around the world, you just start to see that the Grenaches are starting to do better than the Shirazes. So, there's Grenache is finally having its moment in the sun. And not, we've had to do a lot of work. But I definitely remember there was a point in 2014, I remember Barossa Wine Show, I'd bought these old foudres off Tyrrell's. I'd shipped them down to the Barossa. I'd opened them up, scraped them out, dried them, fermented Shiraz in them for a year or two, and then made whole bunchy early picked Grenache, put it in, from 80-year-old vineyard, put it in this big old foudre, chucked it in the Barossa Wine Show and won the trophy. And that moment I knew in 2015 that Grenache was going to happen. It was on. And it's just, you watch it in the press, you see the papers and you see the journalists and, the wine mags and the articles online, and it's happening right now, and it's so exciting. And I got to say, to those guys 10 plus years ago, the Marco Cirillos and the Stephen Panels and the guys that really pushed it, hats off, and you did the work, and they're the guys that need a big hug because they laid a great foundation for what Grenache is today in Australia, and it's going to help everyone out. It's going to help the industry out, especially because we're in such difficult times at the moment. So here's to Grenache, eh?
Absolutely. You've been saying it for a long time, and I've been agreeing with you for a long time. But you do make some absolutely spectacular wines. And like I said, your ancestor vine, Grenache and Mataro, I have to say that I think you've still got some magnums left of that 2015, which is an absolute showstopper. But you've been just make some sensational wines, and you're right, but I think even like you said, in hard times, Grenache still, for the pennies that you pay on all levels, just really delivers. And like you said, in hard times right now, drink Grenache because even those, I don't want to plug Marco Cirillo's wines, but I kind of do as well because he's a legend. But his Vincent Grenache, what is it, $14? Amazing, absolutely amazing. But I wanted to say, you're really quite active on social media, and you really put yourself out there to give kind of candid updates on Instagram and tell people what you're doing. I think it's a huge part of your brand because people connect to you and they connect with what's happening with you. And I think out of so many winemakers out there, the Stone Cellar or your wine club, you really give a lot back to the people that are loyal to you. And like you said, with what's happening, the changes you're making, the field blends that you're doing, whatever it is, you're always very active. And I think that, if someone signs up, which they should do to your wine club, and follow you on Instagram because...
Yeah. And Insta's free. Yeah. We'd like to put up as many videos as we can. It's really important to tell the truth. One of the reasons why I wanted to start Head Wines was because I was selling wine through other people's wine through their stories, and I just needed to understand the truth behind it all, and I wanted to go and figure it out for myself. And it's a really important part of my brand to have no BS, and to really get back to the source, be in the vineyards, talk about the sites, talk about what we're doing, and give people the opportunity, because there's a lot of corporate nonsense and crazy winemaking going on, and we need. I had a bit of a whinge before about brand, and yes, I've got a brand, but gee, we have to talk about where we're making wine how we make it and the ingredients we're putting into it, and be honest about, you know, the struggles of making wine. Like, it's not an easy industry to be in, and it's hard work. It can be hard on families, physical health, mental health. So a bit of honesty doesn't go astray, and hopefully people appreciate that.
They definitely do. That's for sure. Alex, I'm curious to know, if we had to be really brutal and only ask you to drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, what are they going to be?
Well, there's so many. I'm sorry. There are probably 3 wines that have been really important in my life that I've drunk before with close friends, and they've each got a story. I'll try and keep them really short. One was a 1990 Rias, and John Osbeeston from Ultimo Wine Centre, who was a great friend of mine and gave me my sort of first real job in the wine industry, I guess you'd say. When I had cancer in 2001 for a couple of years, and I remember John came. I was working for him at the time. He said, "When you get better, we're going to drink a bottle of 1990 Rias." And we went out to a restaurant at Coco Roco. Anyway, it was a restaurant in Sydney, and it doesn't exist anymore. I think it only existed for a few months because someone gave it a bad review. And anyway, but I remember going to the restaurant and drinking that wine, and I think my head exploded. Like I never tasted anything like it. I never smelt anything like it. And I remember it. That was one of the first moments where I was like, I have to understand what is going on here. Then, so that's definitely one. I can have a case of that, thank you. If you can deliver it to my house, that'd be good.
If only I could.
Yeah. The other was 78 La Chapelle from Hermitage. And myself and 2 good friends, Chris Tyrrell and another good friend of mine, Tom McKellar, we bought a bottle because at the time I thought it was cheap. It was about $900. It was ridiculously cheap. Anyway, we drank that bottle of wine, and I was able to do a bit of research into the wine, and it had a little bit of whole bunch in it, like the 90 Rias had a little bit of whole bunch in it. And I think they were possibly buying some fruit from Clap. Or some finished wine from Clap back in the day. And I was fascinated with, the further I sort of digged into that wine, the more I sort of found that wine also had some whole bunch in it, which is why I really enjoyed it. Same as the 90 Rias, which is 100% whole bunch. And the final one was the 90 that I'd like to drink, is the 90 de Vogüé Musigny. And I bought a few bottles of that back when, you know, before Burgundy just went mad. And I probably only paid $500 a bottle. And I bought a couple of bottles, and I drank them over a few years. And I think that was the last vintage. I really enjoyed that wine in particular because I picked up that there was some whole bunch winemaking in it. So I guess there's a theme there. Those 3 wines. I just love what stems bring to wine. And it's not just a simple, you know, stem flavour or stem tannin. It's probably the way in which the ferment characteristics can happen and what they bring to the wine as well. So yeah, those 3 wines, you can't change the vintage. I'll take a magnum of each, and yeah. And come and join me at the table on the desert island, and you can stay for a while.
Well, if with those 3 wines, very, very happy to. I'd be even in my rowboat.
It's ridiculous. I think there's a combined street value these days of about $10,000. But,
absolutely, we would definitely have to.
Yeah. Poor Soms today, they could never afford to taste those wines. Like I just feel sorry for people these days, you know. And I think because I'm a sharer, perhaps oversharer, I was so lucky to be able to drink those wines, particularly probably at their peak, So,
yeah. Look, I think, you like you said, those wine moments, they transcend a beverage. It becomes a total experience. And like you said, a memory that you can recall like straight back, and you recall flavour. And that is the magic of, essentially this grape juice that you make, and we're really lucky to, I think, have fallen down the rabbit hole and to have that passion for something and to appreciate it the way we do.
The senses. Yeah.
Yep. We'd have a lot more money if we didn't, but
I don't care about money. Don't tell my wife.
You said that. You've got more important things going on. Well, Alex, it's been such a pleasure to chat to you. It always is. I still have some really special bottles of some of your Shiraz and Grenache you gifted to me that I will open the next time I see you. I've popped them under the house for, not for when you die and we look back on life, but after baby, and hopefully we can have a sip of something soon. But thank you so much for spending the time with me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, it's been the best. Yep. Love your work, Shanteh. Well done.
Awesome. Cheers to you, Alex.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.